protecting people from extreme heat waves, floods, and forest fires. This is a very important item, and we've been able to see this over the last few months, not only in the European Union, but also the suffering of people outside the Union. Can I give the floor to Mr. Pascual Navarro Rios? You have the floor, sir.
Presidente, señorías.
President, ladies and gentlemen, Commissioner. Once again, this year, Europe has endured a difficult summer with extreme temperatures and climate events. According to Copernicus, 23 was the warmest year that this continent has ever seen. Facing these catastrophes, the European Union has once again shown its solidarity. The EU Civil Protection Mechanism, for a number of years now, has been playing a very important role in Europe when it comes to natural disasters. Member states activate it to free up a lot of aid. We've seen forest fires in Greece that the President refers to, and the civil protectionism used EU and member state means to launch the biggest seaplane event against fires that we've ever seen. Nonetheless, we have to do more and we have to do better. Climate change means that we're going to have to face new types of challenges and extreme weather events. These are going to occur more frequently and be more intense. Faced with these types of phenomena, member states, as well as the European Union, will have to find new ways to ensure prevention and preparation and responses to these type of events. We're focusing on two fronts. When it comes to responses to catastrophes, the Council has worked quickly to review the legislation for the EU Civil Protection Mechanism. This will allow for firefighting planes and to ensure that we have an operative EU fleet. We are reaching an agreement with the Parliament on this point, and I would like to thank this House for that. I very much believe that we'll be able to achieve success here very quickly. Nonetheless, an immediate response to catastrophes is not enough. Member states and EU institutions have to work more to prevent natural disasters, particularly strengthening a risk reduction capacity. Using the work that we've already done, for example, when it comes to the work on preparedness for catastrophes, member states have to continue to work together to open up new areas of cooperation. To face the effects of climate change, the European Union will have to be more ambitious when it comes to strategy to adaptation to the European Union, to climate change in the European Union. We're going to have to work smarter, and we're going to have to ensure that we work together with international partners to respond to climate change. Member states will have to adapt the goals that were set out in the climate adaptation legislation. This is a key moment to ensure that we strengthen our adaptation legislation. We're going to have to ensure that we are better prepared to face up to extreme weather events, since they are going to occur on a more frequent basis. We have to continue to invest in research and innovation through Horizon Europe to ensure that our societies are resilient to these catastrophes and that we can ensure better crisis management, particularly when it comes to preparing our reaction to catastrophes and to ensure that we can act more early. We have to ensure that we have the appropriate means available to do this. We also have to prepare our citizens, make information more widely available, and to ensure that citizens and volunteers are involved in civil protection activities. It's clear that these extreme events are being worsened by global warming. This is going to be a key moment to reach, the COP28 will be a key moment to reach a global agreement to ensure that we have a climate-neutral economy and that we all prepare to face up to the changes that we're going to see. I believe that global warming can still be limited to 1.5 degrees. The European Union has to focus on boosting all of these changes that are needed at global level. Thank you.
Our next speaker from the Commission is Commissioner Lenarčič.
Mr. President, Mr. State Secretary, honourable members, this weekend we received the terrible news of the earthquake that struck Morocco. And these days we are witnessing catastrophic floods in Libya. These events remind us that disaster preparedness and resilience must be our ultimate goal, and our thoughts are with all the victims of these tragedies. It is our ambition and commitment to do everything we can to save lives in Europe, in our neighbourhood and worldwide. Let me open with the words of Dimitris Hadjifotis, a victim of the wildfires sweeping Greece this summer. I quote, "My life is now stopped. Everything is taken by the fire." End of quote. The wildfire in the Euros region of Greece has been the largest recorded in Europe ever, burning an area of almost 100,000 hectares. Meanwhile, in the same country, Greece, a week ago, 3 years' worth of rain fell within 2 days. In August, 2/3 of Slovenia was underwater. In May, flooding in Italy prompted 900 landslides. Last summer, nearly 62,000 Europeans died from record-breaking heat. And I'm sure you can continue this grim list yourselves. The horrific regularity, intensity, and simultaneity of these emergencies was unusual just a few years ago. Now, it's all too familiar. And I'm afraid it will only carry on accelerating. To continue keeping people safe in this new risk landscape, we urgently need a more disaster-resilient Europe. We must build prevention, preparedness, and response into every part of our society. This summer, Europe's response capacities were strengthened like never before. We fulfilled the promise made by President von der Leyen last year to double our rescEU firefighting air fleet to 28 planes and helicopters, pre-positioning firefighters and implementing a wildfire prevention action plan, and including a support team in the EU's Emergency Response Coordination Centre to monitor wildfires in real time. In fact, 18 firefighting planes and helicopters sent to help combat the flames in Greece this summer came from our collective reserve rescEU fleet. In a dire sign of the need also to strengthen national reserves, other member states could not send reinforcements due to their own high state of wildfire alert. We are facing multiple challenges simultaneously. In July and August alone, the Commission's Emergency Response Coordination Centre handled 12 activations, ranging from wildfires and floods to the gas explosion in Romania, ongoing assistance to Ukraine, and support for the repatriation of EU citizens from Niger. The EU Civil Protection Mechanism, Europe's disaster response system, is already working at full operational level. Over just 2 years, requests for assistance have increased by 400%, and resources are strained to the limits. Soon, we might not be able to help where needed. Clearly, we must continue to strengthen our collective disaster response capacities. This is why the Commission requested a reinforcement of both the Solidarity and Emergency Aid Reserve and the flexibility instrument within the multi-annual financial framework revision. Whether we can continue delivering in the coming years, be it nationally or jointly, depends on the decisions we make today. The current very limited EU budget for civil protection is not enough. We need more financial reinforcement to protect people. Honourable members, the past 4 years of this European mandate have demonstrated clearly that unprecedented disaster demands unprecedented cooperation and action. Yet, they have also reminded us that disaster response alone will not be enough. To maintain a livable future and survive this brutal new normality, we must not only increase our response capacity, we must also ensure that when disasters strike, we are more resilient and the impact is smaller. That means more and better investments in increasing prevention and preparedness, in civil protection, and in climate resilience across the board, across all EU policies and programs, as well as at national levels. Finally, we must keep the climate mitigation ambition urgent and high on our agenda, so that we do not face a future defined by disasters that outstrip our capacity to protect. It is our responsibility to act together and fast for a union that protects Europeans like Dimitris and for a livable future for all of us. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank. Und das Wort.
Thank you. Mr. Vangelis Markis, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, the new parliamentary period, unfortunately, began with a terrible tragedy in my country of Greece, with huge economic and social consequences. These extreme climate phenomena have been afflicting Greece since the summer began. First of all, fires, and then terrible floods, which cost tens of people their lives. This started off in Thessaly and spread out to the whole country. My part of the country was particularly badly affected. People are literally out in the street, and the fact because of their houses being destroyed. And this is still happening. Thousands of houses have been destroyed. 22% of agricultural land has been destroyed. Huge numbers of bridges and the road networks in Thessaly have been destroyed as well. Greece is suffering from its wounds. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for your kind words, as well as the Council. But we can't simply stick to words. We can't just allow that. We need to move to deeds. We need to take steps, and all Greek MEPs call upon you, regardless of their political group, to carry out powerful steps to help and mobilise all of the financial and other possibilities that the EU offers to help Greece, but not just Greece, of course, but all the other countries that have suffered so badly because of this. We need to get round and cut through the red tape in emergency circumstances like this. They can't be hiding behind protocols. We need to realise that we're talking about our fellow citizens, about people's lives. We need, therefore, to see the EU show real solidarity and show that it's real, got a humane heart. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Jahim Mohammed. Thank you, Chair. Well, this summer, you can't escape it. The extreme weather, floods in Slovenia, and huge hail in northern Italy, and serious fires and heavy rainfall in Greece. Europe is faced with huge challenges to adapt to this extreme weather pattern, which has come closer than we ever expected. Climate change is not just something that will happen in the future. It is something that is here, and extreme weather is really producing more damage. It is our responsibility to reduce this damage, so help, solidarity for the areas affected is very important, but we need to make sure that we're better prepared for what we may see in the future. If we want to reduce the impact of the weather patterns, this is no plan B any longer. This is a here and now situation. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Soraya Ramos. You have the floor.
Thank you, President. The first thing I would like to say is to express solidarity with victims of disasters in Morocco, Libya, and here in Europe, Greece. Summer of 2023 has set records when it comes to the temperature, the warmest summer at global level. The Mediterranean has reached the highest temperatures ever seen, at 28.71 degrees. And in Greece, we saw more waterfall in 2 days than in the last 3 years. So Europe is an at-risk area for natural disasters. Climate change is being caused by global warming, and we need to have a European plan for prevention and adaptation and mitigation, and a resilience plan to face up to these changes. However, we also have to keep in mind that the best type of resilience, the best response to natural disasters, is to ensure that nature is more resilient. We need to restore nature. This is a fundamental objective of this plan. Now is not the time to ask for a moratorium on the Green Deal. Now is the time to speed up. We need to see more being invested in prevention to put an end to these types of disasters. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Terry Reinke, you have the floor, madam. Colleagues, serious floods and forest fires. We've really had an extreme weather pattern in Europe. 80,000 hectares have burnt. In Slovenian, floods have led to 500 million damage, and a large part of the country was affected. And in the valley, there was even more damage because of the floods and the results of the floods. Nobody can say that to do nothing is better, cheaper, than to actually start doing something about this. These extreme weather patterns over the next few years are going to cost us millions of euros. Hail, rain, floods is going to have devastating effects for citizens in Europe, and the heat waves already costs the lives of so many people too. So we know this, and despite all of this, despite this reality, there are politicians who say that maybe we need a break first, a break which would mean that the weather patterns would get even worse in the future, and then we'll need to take even more desperate measures to fight against this situation. No breaks, no pauses. No, we need to continue. The climate crisis, the effects of the climate crisis isn't taking a rest either. So we need to do something now. This is politically responsible, because anything else, colleagues, is just to ignore reality. It's difficult to say, well, if we don't do anything, we'll kind of survive, even though reality hits us in the face. So that this is seriously dangerous and irresponsible. So we need to make an effort, because the Green Deal is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And as European Union, we need to do more to have citizens being helped. We are based on solidarity, and for some people, you feel that putting millions of euros into disaster relief packages is certainly better invested than to do nothing. Thank you. Thank you so much. The next speaker, Mr. Emanuel Fakos.
Thank you, Mr. President. The European systems do deal with climate issues and the increased risk of fire and dangers of flood. But in terms of how they actually work, it's not been very impressive. We need to prevent rather than cure. We need to act quickly. We need to have a proper system of prevention, particularly in fire-prone zones. We need to make certain that highly flammable trees are dealt with and that steps are taken, and we have a lot more fire prevention drones in the air. What we need to do is check the way that regions and municipalities interact with each other when it comes to fire protection. We need to look at the farmers in Greece, the beekeepers, all of the people who have suffered under these situations, because prevention is actually cheaper than the subsequent work, the rescue work which has to be carried out. Just look at Thessaly and Evros. It's important that Europe needs to have a complete overhauling of this system. It's more important than ever that we do this work not just for the good of Greece, but for Europe in general. We need a new plan to prevent disasters, developing it in Europe and making certain that it's interoperable. If you look at what's happened in Thessaly, you can see that Europe is able to act after the fact. We've got the Solidarity Fund. We've seen attempts to help farmers out under the CAP and also help out smallholders who've been so badly affected by the floods. Thank you, President.
Madame Silvia Sardone.
Thank you. Mrs. Silvia Sardone, you have the floor.
L'Europa deve fare di più per contrastare.
Well, Europe needs to do more to fight disasters. The green strategies seem to have an effect. I mean, if we would have built the proper dams, we wouldn't have had the floods in the north of Italy. If we would have cleaned the rivers, dikes, dams, all interventions which we need to deal with, but they seem to go against in your policies. The natural disasters, such as floods, need to be solved by more structures built by men. Now, 2 months to talk about hot heat waves, and then you realize that the data say the opposite. There's been a drop of 3.3% in energy consumption in Italy from one year to the next, and the average temperature did not really show a huge increase. Now, there's been a drop of not 0.3 degrees compared to the previous read. So, you know, this is not the apocalypse. Let us have fewer serious debates on the climate.
Nächster Redner ist Herr Petros Kokalis.
Mr. Kokalis, you have the floor.
2 months ago, for the first time in the world, we moved beyond the 1.5 degree limit. These disasters throughout the globe in Europe are absolutely terrifying. And we've seen the new records in terms of damage caused. Our policies are destroying people's lives and are actually threatening the survival of democracy. Things are getting worse and worse, and people aren't being helped properly by the state. The Solidarity Fund isn't big enough to deal with the scope of the problem. Small countries in Europe, such as Greece, my own country, is suffering in particular. Time has come to rejig these funds and to come up with some kind of compensatory fund for people who have suffered under these disasters. Solidarity is vitally important. It's important that we don't have any exceptions when it comes to paying these compensation, because if we mobilise Article 1072B of the Treaty of the European Union, we can do something about the people who have suffered so much. We need help, and we're calling for your solidarity as well. Thank you.
Danke. Unser nächster Redner.
Thank you so much. Mr. Lefteris Nikolaou Alavanos, you have the floor, sir.
Καπνίζει ακόμη ο Εύρος.
Evros is still smoking with the biggest fire in the history of Europe. 19 people dead, 100,000 hectares destroyed. In Thessaly, thousands of complete whole villages have been cut off. People are without food, without electricity, exposed, and there's no help for them. We can see that, however, with them, grassroots organisations have been helping, giving new life to the slogan, only the people can help the people. The criminal responsibility of the EU and bourgeois governments is obvious when it comes to the so-called climate crisis. The means to stop these phenomena turning into tragedies exist, but they're not being used because of the EU's cost-benefit approach adopted by all Greek governments. Directives talk about avoiding the excessive costs of flood protection, and with economic efficiency, whole villages which could have been saved have been abandoned. What we need to do is make certain we rescue the people who have been cut off right now, that we adopt all the protection measures that we need as a state's responsibility, and that we start and equip the staff and equip the firefighting and forest protection services, and that we compensate to the tune of 100% all the people who have been affected, and that all the requisite European funding be mobilised to that effect. Thank you.
Kollege José Manuel.
Thank you, Mr. José Manuel Fernandez.
Thanks very much, Mr. President, colleagues, Commissioner and the Council representative. Every year we say how terrible it is that we've got these fires, we've got these floods, we've got these deaths. But we need words, but we also need deeds. And we're not doing enough. You've got the money in the Council, and all of the money, for example, wasn't always used in Portugal. What we need to do is have dams built so that we have water in reserve for a drought, so we can plan ahead and help develop the European economy. There's no lack of financial resources. We need to plan and spend them wisely. And over and above prevention, which is the best solution, we also need, of course, to fight these disasters as well. And the Commission, often against the desires of the Council, has done its job by strengthening the European Civil Protection Mechanism, strengthening rescue services. We, with fewer resources, are able to do more. If we shared out these resources and coordinated things, we can do a great deal. That's why we are asking for everyone to work together in this fight. And after everyone doing their own homework, and that we don't use people, but we don't see people blaming Europe for this when they do have money at home that they're not always spending. The European Union, the European Council, Parliament, we all need to do our jobs, but member states need to pull together as well. Thank you.
You have the floor, Mrs. Gualmini.
Transizione ecologica è una polizza salvavita.
Well, the ecological transition is a safety net. We say that the left and the right work together on so many subjects, but this is not really true in climate change. There's a right and there's a left. The votes are different. Behaviour is different. Strategies are different. The right has turned eco-skepticism into its slogan, and they fight against a Green Deal, which is the need to fight against a devastating climate change. But we are in favour of mitigation, adaptation. You, however, it's always you say, well, it's been hot. We protect nature. You are negationists. We want to have renewable sources, and you seem to be in love with fossil fuels. We want to safeguard the future, but you want to safeguard the past. We've seen this in Emilia-Romagna, a right-wing government which is carrying out a negative policy which does not call upon a solution. So let us try and ask ourselves whether we want to continue with the Green Deal, because the political forces seem to be going in opposing directions. Tell the truth. Are we going forwards or not? Thank you. Mr. Max Orville, you have the floor.
In July 2023, we saw the highest temperatures ever registered. Forest fires devastated a large number of European countries, including Greece. Just 72 hours ago, Morocco witnessed a devastating earthquake, and Europe stands by Morocco. The European Union Civil Protection Mechanism is an effective and useful tool to face these challenges. We have to strengthen it and ensure that we have human, material and financial ambitions in doing so. This is through prevention, training and raising awareness through populations about what they should do in cases of major risks. It also means that we have to increase European capacity to intervene with our own seaplanes and jointly buying material. Disasters are hitting the world and are doing so on a more frequent and stronger basis. We've seen cyclones in the Antilles and fires in the Canary Islands. The outermost regions are the first to be affected by climate change. They need specific protection. They need to have specific climate solutions, and their experience can help the rest of Europe.
Thank you. Mr. Bas-Eickhout, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, what we're seeing again this summer, and what we are seeing nowadays every summer and winter, is the new climate reality. This is exactly what science has been warning for, and we will see it more, because the warming of our planet will lead to more extremes. And we are not prepared to deal with those extremes, and that's what we have seen again this summer. First of all, I really would like to thank the Commission for already pushing for a couple of years now the EU Civil Protection Mechanism, and really a plea to the Council to now finally move substantially on that. Because every time when we are discussing this, and especially after the summer, we are mourning the victims of climate extremes, but every time the Council is not really putting the money where their mouth is. So in that sense, a lot to be done. But we need to step up. We need to step up. We need to prevent. And that is also using our nature. It's our best buffer capacity for water shortage and water extremes. We need to create more space for rivers in order to make sure that we can cope with the extremes of our climate system. But most importantly, we need to step up our speediness towards a fossil-free economy, because that's the only way to prevent more of this. Thank you.
Danke, Herr Angel.
Thank you. Mr. Jambaski, you have the floor.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. The European Commission is neither transparent nor open. It is lobbying for dubious green policies based on unscientific claims. It is based on lobbyism, which tries to change the way in which we, Europe, generate energy and the way in which economies work. This is against the interests of European citizens and European entrepreneurs. This is a fact. When I ask the European Commission how much is the Green Deal, what does it cost, they say thank you for the question. When we ask how much did the vaccines cost, they say thank you. When we ask what is the cost of the production of an electric vehicle, they say thank you for the question. Well, this is a wall of lack of transparency whose purpose is to stop the development of Europe. This will make us dependent on external.
Mr. Georgmeier, you have the floor, sir.
Dankeschön, Herr geschätzter Präsident.
Thank you. Honourable President. Well, extreme weather has always existed. Don't pretend that this is something new. And even in my region this summer, in the south of Steiermark, well, we had huge floods after a heavy rainfall. Well, yes, it leads to human suffering, but on the other hand, a certain livelihood is threatened because of the damage caused by these heavy floods. Of course, we need to provide aid and support, and people need to be on the spot. The voluntary firefighters who have fought huge battles against the fires this summer, and we need to thank them, because if not, this disaster would have gone in a completely opposite direction. So these organizations in Austria are mostly voluntary organizations, and they shoulder these responsibilities. They need special support, and we need to see what we can do. There are many specific measures that can be taken to protect people, adaptation to heat, adjusting to floods. This is more expensive, but you apparently want to sink this into the dark channels of the Ukraine rather than working on this disaster. Mr. Jurek, you have the floor.
Dankeschön. The tragic consequences of heat waves, forest fires and floods, as recently seen in Greece, Cyprus and other European countries, show that there is still lessons to be learned and actions to be taken. The vulnerability of our societies remain very high, despite important progress in the cooperation amongst countries and investments in advanced equipment. The vulnerability of scientists have warned us a long time ago that we used to consider extreme and unlikely probable is now becoming business as usual. Our infrastructures and protection need to adapt as fast as possible to the changing climate conditions. It is obvious that the lack of appropriate and timely human action allows climate change to become climate crisis. The complexity of disasters implies timely planning and demands high-level dynamic responding governance. Against climate-related, life-threatening risks, we need centralised management. The way the EU handled the pandemic may be a good example, namely collective monitoring, collective action. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. The next speaker, I don't quite see that she is here. So, Mr. Mato, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. I want to just give you one figure. 88,000 hectares burned in Spain in 2023. The results of this have been particularly tragic in the Canary Islands, and particularly in Tenerife, where almost 15,000, 7% of the surface of the island has been destroyed. 80 million euros worth of damage has been caused. We need to learn from these disasters and ask us what strategies and policies will be appropriate. It's not on that the Canary Islands should require these planes which can dump water or helicopters all the time, because they take hours to arrive from the mainland to the islands. We need to strengthen our cohesion policy and the Solidarity Fund and the Civil Protection Mechanism. It's also important that Member States work to conserve and protect and prevent and restore our forests. Finally, it's vital that the European Union draft a support strategy for the whole primary sector, which, in the light of these, is really living on the edge and can't handle these issues by itself. We need help, and everybody does. Thank you.
Danke. Mr. Alex.
Thank you. Mr. Saliskaviu, you have the floor.
Grazie.
Thank you, President. We cannot deny what is obvious. The climate crisis is here. We saw this summer extreme weather conditions, floods, heat waves, and wildfires. Some member states, in a few days, had to go through heat waves and extreme floods. In Malta, the smallest member state, we had record temperatures around 43 degrees for various days, and this created great challenges for our critical infrastructure. These extreme conditions are with us, and they will be on the increase. and this leaves a negative impact on our quality of life, our environment, and our economies. Therefore, we need a strategic plan, and we need to continue to invest in a resistance plan that will help citizens, protect them, protect industries, critical infrastructure, and our environmental sustainability. Thank you.
Sie, Mr. Martin, Sie haben das Wort.
Mr. Hojsik, you have the floor.
We cannot hide from the climate change. It limits and impacts all of us, people, municipalities, companies, states. It kills animals and humans. It doesn't distinguish. This summer was another example of that. We have seen live the extreme temperatures, forest fires, heat waves, but also floods in the south of Europe. Slovakia was no exception. We have seen floods in Gemer, Lipto and Spiš regions, extreme heat waves. The snowballs of ping-pong balls have been demolishing grain in southern Slovakia. We have seen destruction of whole buildings. We cannot adapt to the climate change. The extreme heat waves with high humidity is something that the human body cannot tolerate. People die. We can capture a lot of water, but we need to do that. But if you have a rainfall over 3 days, which is equal to the rainfall of 3 years, there's not much that you can do. This is exactly what has happened in Greece. Therefore, reducing emissions has to go hand in hand with adaptation. The climate change will not distinguish between the victims, and the same has to go for us. It cannot divide us. Across political families, it has to unite us in the responsibility for future. The bill for unnecessary disputes will be paid by everyone, irrespective of our political conviction. Therefore, we have to do our utmost to prevent future damages.
Vielmals, Madame.
Thank you. Mrs. Marie Toussaint, you have the floor.
La planète traverse une...
The planet is experiencing a profound climate crisis, and Europe is not free from it. We're seeing unprecedented fires in Greece, drought in Spain, and problems elsewhere. And yet, wars continue. The right is fighting the nature restoration law. Just before yesterday, we saw the President of the Commission say nothing about the nature restoration law. Madam Metsola says that climate policies are leading to an increase in populism in Europe, and yet this is at the same time when millions of Europeans are experiencing the fallout of climate change. What we're really seeing is economic crises leading to populism. Ecological crises are the way in which leaders can give in to lobbies. We have a system which is destroying human beings and nature. We have to change our way of thinking. We want to support living beings, and every minute counts in doing this.
Mrs. Zalewska, you have the floor.
President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot give back the lives or the livelihood to those who lost them, who suffered. But what we can do now is to work now and in the future. What we need now and in the future is money and solidarity, so that we can reconstruct our infrastructure, our livelihood. We also must carry out a thorough, in-depth analysis. Let me remind you, investigations are underway in many countries as regards those fires. Please bear in mind, those fires, in some cases, were caused by human action. So, also remember, there is no more money in our system. The EU budget lacks to the tune of 65 billion euros. So now what we need money for is reconstruction, is rebuilding our cities and reforming our streets covered with concrete. All of that costs money, and that money should be paid to our farmers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Rosanna Conte, you have the floor.
Risuona ancora nelle mie orecchie
I can still hear the sound of the hail which fell with deep force in Veneto, Friuli, Venezia Giulia and Trentino Alto Adige. Chunks of ice as big as the palm of your hand destroying crops and cars. Gusts of wind which could rip off roofs and uproot trees. People and animals injured by this bad weather. And how can we forget the flood which occurred in Emilia-Romagna, a terrible disaster? But in the northeast in Italy, we did respond, but left-wing governments didn't allow some of the programmes to be mobilised to respond to what a colleague's been saying. But the northeast region, they did respond and react thanks to the hard work of the people and the tireless efforts of volunteers, firemen and civil protection officers. But every extreme climate event weakens our territory and makes our citizens exposed to danger. Brussels needs to forget about ad hoc measures aimed at 2050 and ignore the problems that our families and companies are facing today. To be genuinely resilient, states need rapid, effective responses right away. Now is the time. Thank you.
Das Wort gebeten hat Frau
Thank you. The next speaker, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you for giving me the floor. The unusual weather has affected Europe and the rest of the world, and it has caused a lot of damage. Extreme rainfall, record high temperatures, drought, floods, storms have caused a lot of damage in nature, but have also claimed, unfortunately, human lives and their homes. In moments like these, we have to fall back on one of the key European qualities, and that is solidarity. We are not alone. We live in a community where we care about our neighbors, about our citizens, about people in general. About a month after the terrible floods that have affected Slovenia, that have struck 2/3 of our country, I would like to take this opportunity and thank everyone who helped Slovenia, who helped our citizens, from the European Commission to other countries, and most of all the volunteers who came and helped clean the devastation that was caused by wild rivers. When cameras stop rolling, however, places and people still need help. And that is why I'm asking my colleagues, when the time comes to vote to financially help Slovenia with funds from the European Solidarity Fund, to vote for that help. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to give the floor to Mr. Marcos Rossempere, please.
Gracias,
Thank you, President. Heat waves, fires, floods, heavy rainfall, these extreme weather events are more frequent. People pay very heavily for the consequences, and more people suffer, especially those who are less well off. We've had the hottest summer ever registered in Spain. We know this, heat waves that take longer, that last longer, or floods like last week's floods. The temperature of the sea's water goes up, and these heat waves are more frequent. We need to act more firmly. The path that we need to take is clear. The European Green Pact, a cohesion fund, a solidarity fund. The member states and European institutions need to take part in this path. They need to do this as a priority. We need preventive measures to face up to these extreme phenomena, and funding for the civil protection mechanism to strengthen the European response. It was a threat in the past, but now it threatens the livelihood of millions of people. So we need a commitment, a firm commitment to tackle this. Thank you. Thank you so much. The next speaker, Mrs. Irene Tolleret.
Chers collègues, un travail important a été initié pour prévenir et gérer les catastrophes naturelles.
We've done some work, colleagues, to deal with these issues, solidarity among states of the EU, but also involving third countries, as we've seen with Canada. It's there, it's working. But Far too often, the Commission is working with a silo-like mentality when what we really need to do is have cross-cutting, consistent policies. When we have a law to reduce emissions, for example, every time we write a law like that, we should ask ourselves, is this increasing or reducing the risk of national disasters? The dead timber, for example. This is something which in our forests will increase the risk of fire. I'm not saying this off my own bat, it's firemen who have been telling me that this is the case. Also, I think that we need to look at the question of pastures. Pasture is a key element in preventing natural risk of natural disasters, and it's also sustainable as far as our forests are concerned. And also to resist these things and protect our citizens, we need to have a way of raising awareness. Other countries are doing this, having days devoted to this. If you're on holiday, if you're at home, you shouldn't be unaware of the risks that you run and what you should do to prevent those risks. Thank you.
Yeah, Holmgren.
I'd like to give the floor to Perm Holmgren.
Tack, herr ordförande.
Thank you, President. This summit in Europe, people have seen what it means to live in a high-risk climate. We have already set ambitions, and yet we're still going to have a climate that will be 2 degrees warmer. We're still going to have heat waves, floods. They're going to be more serious and more frequent. And so it means that already we're going to have to focus on better adaptation to climate change. But what's most important, particularly in light of next year's elections, is that all countries, all political parties, all industries have to be more ambitious when it comes to cutting emissions. Time is pressing. We have to change the world to be able to face up to the challenges that lie ahead of us. But time is ticking by quickly.
Sie sind unsere nächste Rednerin.
The next speaker, Mrs. Pernille Weiss. Thank you. We have an EU that is equipped for disasters. We need to discuss this, but what we need to do is to deal with this. The crisis has many causes, many actors, and this plays either you clearly indicate that something is not functioning properly, and others are taking advantage of this during an electoral period. So we're focusing on the EU Green Deal. But this, of course, also means that the agenda for the elections has been set aside. And today, especially in the situation of water, we need to act jointly, and hopefully, colleagues, you will be able to find my email. I drafted a letter together with the EWAS, and we're sending this to the heads of state and government, where we call upon governments to, over the next legislative period, we get a blue deal. We don't have proper future if we don't take a serious care of our water resources. So we need to deal with this, and if not, water is going to flood us. Thank you.
Mrs. Serdes, thank you, President. Colleagues, this summer will live on in our memories because huge extreme climate events have now become a reality. We need, therefore, a multifaceted approach from the European Union if we want to be more resilient when it comes to climate disasters, because people can be affected. The new infectious diseases, for example, civil protection. People are looking at the civil protection mechanism, and it's going to be scrutinised very carefully. It's important when the Commission comes up with its ideas, making this more flexible when it comes to minimising health risks in disaster situations and the long-term impact it'll have on the people in the affected areas, whether we're talking about floods or forest fires. These are things that are part of our everyday lives now, and it's vitally important that everybody be protected. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mrs. Maria Spiraki. You have the floor.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, Minister, colleagues. The climate crisis in Greece is a terrible tragedy. In Thessaly and Thrace, people have died. A unique ecosystem has been destroyed. Half of the country's water supply has now been compromised. We need to mobilise the budgetary possibilities 2021 to 2027 to try to deal with this. We heard these commitments being made, but they need now to become a practical reality. Climate change isn't going to spare anybody. We need high levels of resilience and protection. We need to start working on this right away. We need to mobilise money to help the people who have already suffered. And what's in the Solidarity Fund isn't enough. We need more, and the European Investment Bank needs to provide soft loans to help people out as well. We've seen what's happened in the last few weeks. We've seen the response from the Mitsotakis government, and we've seen the people suffering. We shouldn't allow Greece to get bogged down in these issues. We need to respond in a way that's commensurate with the tragedy. Thank you.
I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Milan Briglec, next speaker.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. In August, 2/3 of Slovenia's territory were hit by terrible floods, causing billions of euros in damage, destroying many homes, damaging infrastructure, and unfortunately also claiming human lives. We have to thank an excellent civil protection system, government offices, and numerous volunteers that have prevented the damage from getting worse. And I would also like to thank for the response and solidarity of other member states and also third countries. I would also like to thank the European Union and international organizations. I'm also pleased with the response and engagement of Mr. Lenarčič and Mrs. von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, who visited Slovenia. Unfortunately, Slovenia is not the only country in the EU that has suffered this summer. The EU will be key to ensure a long-term response, to ensure human safety, and to adapt to everything that is going on in our environment. We will have to quadruple the resources in the European Fund, and we have to send a clear message to European citizens that in their worst moments they are not alone. Thank you.
Papandreou, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President. These extreme phenomena in Morocco, Slovenia and Greece have shown that climate change is here and everyone is starting to suffer from it. In Thessaly, to give you an example, we've seen houses completely destroyed, and it's something that people could never have imagined before. The European Commission needs to adopt emergency measures to try to address the situation. Many colleagues have mentioned this before, and how we need to support the Green Deal even more firmly. It's important that we try to deal with the problems which are going to be caused by the polluted surface water that we are now seeing. We have measures which haven't been applied properly. Until December, I'd like to see that we in the S&D group would propose that we have a to-do list involving the best practices when it comes to addressing problems caused by fires and floods. And the army, the firemen, the police all need to work together, and we can work in a spirit of solidarity. That's already happened in Greece, and that example needs to be followed. It's urgent that we work together and mobilise the solidarity mechanism as quickly as we can, as colleagues have said, because I think that democracy could be imperilled if we don't do anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur Christophe Clérachon, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. I'd like to start by congratulating all of those who fought these disasters across Europe and also welcome the European protection mechanism against crises. But what you've said is that you don't have the means you need to fight these crises. The truth is that we don't know all of our vulnerabilities in Europe. We're seeing an index vulnerability index being developed, but it's not very used. We need to have an adaptation plan, and we need to have a real plan to mobilize societies. The truth is that your disaster goals should be our common basis, but they are still in their own silo and are mainly intergovernmental. In reality, it's really only within this Parliament that even within this Parliament, civil protection plays a marginal role. In the Parliament, there is a cross-cutting group, a horizontal group between Envy and Regi to look at these issues. That could be a good idea to work on. In 2024, a year after your disaster resilience goals, it would be a good idea as well to have a high-level conference with the Council, the Parliament and the Commission, so that without having to wait for the elections, we can breathe new life into these policies to change the model that we used to work.
Coming to the Catch the Eye point, I have 4 speakers on my list. I will start with Mr. Nemec Matjaž.
Dear colleagues, this summer has also taken a toll on many countries of the EU. We've had natural accidents, one after another. Climate change is here with a huge toll. Slovenia has been affected by millennial floods. This has been the biggest natural disaster in Slovenia that affected more than 2/3 of our territory. Also, 6 people died. Damage could actually amount to 7 billion euros. On behalf of all Slovenians, I would like to thank all member states for providing us with help. There is a lot of solidarity on the part of our citizens. That's why I would like to thank all volunteers that were actually fighting the damage of the floods. Last year we were fighting floods, and I also actually sent an initiative to the Commission to set up an all-European mechanism to have reserve fleets to fight fires. Of course, the recovery will be very expensive. That's why I have an appeal to all EU institutions. We need EU funds, so please, let's actually approve the financing of the recovery.
Frau Jutta Paulus.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Paulus, you have the floor.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, liebe Kolleginnen.
Thank you, President, colleagues. Every single year, every single decade, every single century, we are faced with extreme weather conditions. And that is what we have seen in the past. I mean, what have been used are computer models. We have very performing computer models, and these are then compared with what was observed in the past. So this is not speculation, and the reality clearly shows that this is happening. And many people say we need better adjustment strategies. Yes, that's correct. We need to give nature more space because natural solutions, of course, are probably the cheapest too. But we need to see where we build, What are we to rebuild? What's the point of rebuilding areas that are affected by floods year after year? What's the point of building new infrastructure? I mean, this is wasteful. Our funds don't help us, and even insurance companies in the United States will be rejecting this type of infrastructure. They would not cover this type of building of infrastructure. So let us not waste any further money. Thank you. Mr. Pimenta Lopez, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. We've got all these proposals and measures to face up to natural disasters. We need to reduce disparities between member states and regional disparities, particularly protecting those which are poorer and have high exposure levels to risk, make certain that we can live it more harmoniously when it comes to nature. We need to help support disaster prevention, cohesion policy and rural development policy and regional policy. The Solidarity Fund, the protection of the environmental response to climate change can help here. But we're seeing, in fact, a reduction of things like this to increase the profits of the armament and energy industry. We see people who ought to be working on protection in their member states losing their jobs. We're not protecting our forests, and money is being made by these groups which are basically prioritising their own needs over those of the people.
Muchas gracias, querido presidente.
Thank you, President Karas. This debate is about extreme heat waves, floods and forest fires. These events have all happened in my region, Alicante, and so I think all of us, or at least most of us in this chamber, agree that the origin, the cause of these problems, including drought as well, is climate change. And so we have to accelerate financing for the Green Deal. The Green Deal needs a climate budget. We need to issue community debt in order to finance all of this. But at the same time, Alicante, my region, needs some kind of a system for the to deal with the torrential rain that we're currently dealing with. The Commission has to make more efforts here. We also have to ensure that we have a system which will move water to where it's required during times of drought or drought. And so we need to ensure that the Commission can help us with this as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to ask Commission and Council for their final comments. Commissioner Lenarčič, you have the floor.
Mr. President, honourable members, I do thank you for this discussion. And I want to thank in particular to the voices of support for the Union Civil Protection Mechanism. Indeed, even in an unprecedented, challenging year like this one, not a single request for assistance addressed to the Union Civil Protection Mechanism went unanswered. And yes, in view of the worsening risk landscape, we need to further strengthen this mechanism. But we also need faster, smarter, and more systemic climate adaptation. We need strengthening of the resilience of our ecosystems, because nature is our first line of defense against disasters. This way we'll be able to protect people and to ensure that the damages do not surpass our capacity to manage them. The European Union is already taking action to strengthen its collective resilience against disasters. This February we adopted, as was already mentioned, the European Disaster Resilience Goals to assist both the Union and the Member States to better anticipate and withstand future emergencies. And these goals must now be rolled out across Europe, simply to keep people safe. Investments in preparedness and prevention save lives. They protect communities and spare budgets. Every euro invested in prevention and preparedness can save from 5 to 10 euros in response, while average annual losses due to weather and climate-related disasters already total 14 billion euros across the Union. There is some good news, for instance, that the investment in resilience is indeed increasing. For instance, allocations under the cohesion policy have nearly doubled allocations for disaster resilience, from 7 billion euros during the previous MFF to almost 13 billion in the current MFF. And also the new instrument for recovery and resilience adds on an estimated 12 billion climate change. Obviously, more will have to be done. But no amount of preparation and response will save our planet unless every part of society works together to tackle the fundamental cause of these disasters, which is climate breakdown and environmental degradation. Without such action, we are on a certain path of destruction. This July was the hottest month on record globally. And this is a warning of what an average summer will be without meaningful climate action. That's why we must continue to integrate the European Green Deal across all sectors. How much will it cost? Well, it will cost much, much less than if nothing is done. If nothing is done, there is a doubt that there will be a livable future for humanity on this planet. Indeed, in my view, European Green Deal is our all-encompassing, truly cross-sectoral prevention strategy. In short, we need more response capacity, we need more resilience, and we need more climate mitigation and adaptation to prevent the worst. And we have many of the instruments and mechanisms that are needed to achieve this across every sector of the EU. We must mobilize all of this, including common agricultural policy, including cohesion policy, including a recovery and resilience facility to make this happen. And obviously, we have to strengthen, we have to reinforce solidarity and emergency aid reserve. And we must use the midterm point in the multi-annual financial framework to reassess the funding that is devoted to disaster prevention and climate resilience. And I really encourage the Parliament to support this important cause during the ongoing review process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Navarro-Rios, please, on behalf of Council. You have the floor, sir.
Señor Presidente, Señorías.
President, honourable members, Mr. Commissioner Lenartic, I very much welcome the debate that was held today. That is to have more response, prevention and reaction measures in the Union, and I reiterate the solidarity of Council with Greece and also other Mediterranean countries that have suffered from disasters. When we talk about adjustment to climate change and resilience, we need to face up to challenges and deal with these challenges, but also have sustainable transition and fair and equitable transition. I take note of the proposals tabled by Commissioner Lenartic, and I'd like to point out that Council is thinking of the Commission's proposal for the multi-annual financial framework and the proposals tabled by the Commission in the different areas that were highlighted today. In order to prevent the disasters caused by climate change, we need to have an intersectoral approach, where adaptation is at the very heart of these measures, and Council is prepared to examine any legislative proposal on prevention measures. which, as was said today, for the time being are non-binding rules, and it is also prepared to consolidate all the measures for coordination, non-binding coordination measures. And thank you so much for your attention.
President.
Thank you so much, President of Council. This debate is now concluded, and this brings us now to the next item on our agenda. That is the Commission and Council statements on the EU-Tunisia agreement and the